Empire.
Hello and welcome to my podcast. Today, another bonus podcast, but this time it's not about draft day memories. I'll have some more of those in coming weeks, but it's on a possible left tackle for Washington at 19, and also some insight on the newest Washington tight end. So I have Mike Niziolek from Roanoke.com, and who also writes for the Richmond Times-Dispatch, to discuss Virginia Tech left tackle Christian Darrisaw. Michael covers the Hokies and has written a really good series on Darrisaw leading up to the draft. And I have former Washington tight end Logan Paulsen on to discuss Sammis Reyes, who was a basketball player in college but signed with Washington Tuesday as he will attempt to make the transition from basketball to NFL tight end. Logan has worked with him, so he has some really good insight. It's a quick podcast, so stick around. Don't forget, you can read my work on ESPN.com. Lots of draft stuff on our site now, and I'll be going over some possible scenarios for Washington in terms of trading up or whatever on Thursday. Also, you'll want to listen to the next podcast after this one when I'm joined by safety Cam Curl. Really enjoyed my chat with him. Anyway, I'll drop some more nuggets in the next podcast. For now, let's get to former Washington tight end Logan Paulsen talking about Sammis Reyes. He made one hell of a player comp for Reyes. Don't forget, you can follow Paulsen on Instagram at Logan_Paulsen82. So Logan, I didn't think we'd be sitting here talking about a Chilean tight end today, but they went out and signed the Sammis Reyes. You know him, you worked out with him. What is Washington getting here?
So I think the first thing you get is to get that basketball kind of athleticism. And one of the things that always makes you cautious about a tight end or a guy converting from basketball is the lack of physicality. In my experience, most basketball players tend to be a slider build. They have a hard time keeping on weight. And that's not Sammis' problem. He is a big dude. He's 6'6", 6'6.5", and he carries 260 like a smaller man. Like, he's big. He's got big old wrists. He can add a ton of weight. You shake his hand, and the hand goes up your arm kind of thing. It's like you're shaking a baseball mitt. And so immediately he kind of passes the eye test right away, and you kind of say, let's see how this guy moves. And you see him run. He's got a little stiffness in his upper back. I think that's probably because he's not used to the movements, but he can run. He can jump. He's got great strength in his arms and his legs. He's got a big, thick lower half. And you kind of say to yourself, those are the things physically that are just checking boxes one after another. And I remember when I first met him, I said, you can tell me all the numbers. You can say you're going to run fast. And then he ended up going out and running really fast at Miami's pro day. 4'6". He had a 40-inch vertical, which shows those explosive characteristics. Like I mentioned, big wingspan, tall guy. And you kind of say to yourself, who does he remind you of? And he reminds me a ton, I'm not even exaggerating here, of Jimmy Graham, a ton of Jimmy Graham. And I think he's a little bit of a better athlete, which is going to sound crazy. Now it comes down to how they utilize him. Like, can he pick up the game quick enough? Because again, he played basketball. He's from Chile. It's not part of their culture the same way it is here in the United States. But he is an econ major. And so the second you have a conversation with him, you realize this guy is an extremely smart dude. He's extremely driven. He's learned multiple languages. Like, he has this background in kind of academia that makes me believe he'll be able to learn whatever kind of information is presented to him. And so, we were talking about it the other day with the tight ends. And if there was anybody that excited me, I didn't bring him up at the time because I didn't know what his status was with his pro day. But he was the guy, honestly, that I was most excited about, right?
Really?
Because I think we're talking about projects, right? We're talking about converting wide receivers. We're talking about guys from small schools. And if you want a guy that just checks every single physical box for the position, and has a good head on his shoulders and is a motivated professional, because he's got some entrepreneurial kind of background as well, you kind of say to yourself, this guy is really worth taking a flyer on, and especially in a position group and room where Logan Thomas has made this transition relatively recently and kind of has the experience of saying, hey, I didn't play tight end, but these are some things that kind of bring a guy along. And obviously the coaching staff there understands how to get the most out of their players, which is really exciting.
So what will be one or two of the things from a physical standpoint you talk about, like some of the things that, because he hasn't played, I think he had practice for 1 week in high school. What are some of the little things he's going to have to get used to that we can see maybe a progression as we go through the summer to how he's adapting there? But what are some of the little things you'll have to get used to that will tell you he can do it or not?
Yeah, so I think the big thing with any kind of basketball player making the transition, even when Darren Waller, for example, made the transition to tight end, is the physicality of the position, right? And so you turn on the basketball tape, you say, oh, well, he's boxing out, he's aggressive to the basket, he likes to dunk on people, he's got this kind of attacking mentality, which is good. But football is a totally different animal, right? And you can run around all you want in underwear and kind of make yourself look good, but you have to be able to execute at a high level when it comes down to that physical element and those physical aspects. And then kind of that's one, and then 1A or 1B would probably be just the mental aspect. And I talked about already how I think he's got the right makeup mentally to kind of make that transition really nicely. But you never know until you get there. Do you get them on the field? And you have to kind of make those split-second decisions and kind of rely on their reactions and their natural athleticism. So those would be the two things for me. And again, this would be the third kind of thing I think that's going to be really important is how does the staff use him? Do they use him like a Greg Olsen kind of guy where that is going to be much easier because you're just running routes basically. You're not kind of in the line. You're not having to learn that martial art of blocking with the same technical proficiency. And I think all those three factors are something that I would be really keeping an eye on because I think, like I thought about this on the car ride after I saw I got signed and I thought, well, this is such a great thing because he has everything you want at the position. Like Thaddeus Moss, who everyone knows and just got released. Like he was a good football player in college, but he didn't have anything that made you go, wow. Mm-hmm. And everything about Sammis makes you go physically and mentally makes you go, wow. And I think that's something when you talk about a project at the position that has to get you super excited and and we talked about compliment to Logan Thomas. I think he gives you that in spades. So
very good. Logan, appreciate the time and the insight because I don't want to spend a great deal of time on him because at the end of the day, he's still a project. Right. I do think he's going to be an intriguing guy to watch this summer. So thanks a lot for joining me.
Yeah, no problem, man. Thanks for having me.
After this break, I'll be back with Michael Niziolek to talk about Christian Darrisaw. You can follow Michael on Twitter at Michael Niziolek, Michael, Niziolek. And you can read his work on Roanoke.com and the RichmondTimesDispatch.com. He wrote, like I said, he wrote a series of articles on Darrisaw leading into the draft and his preparation. So Michael has some really good insight into Darrisaw as a player.
Hello, it's Tyler Roman, former NFL scout and host of the Roman Around the League podcast. Every week, I update my mock draft that not only looks at the best players available, but the needs for all first-round teams. The draft board keeps changing with all the movement this year, so tune into my show, Roman Around the League. That's ROMAN Around the League podcast. Subscribe wherever you get your podcast and check out all of the great shows from Empire Media.
All right, Mike. Well, you wrote a three-part series on Christian Darrisaw for the Roanoke.com papers. You can also check it out on the Richmond Times-Dispatch website as well. So I'm curious because he's a guy of interest here in Washington. What did you learn about him throughout writing that series?
Well, I mean, Christian, it's funny. He's a guy that came, had no, started out with 2 stars and no offers, and so worked his way up, would stop at Fork Union before getting to Virginia Tech, and, was really done his starter day one for Virginia Tech and started for 3 years, played through injuries, had a foot injury for his freshman year, groin injury last year, really tough kid. Just anything that they asked him to do, he did. Only missed 2 games in his career. Just a terrific all-around player for Virginia Tech. During his tenure.
So, how did he go from being a guy with 2-star to this point? Because that is quite a journey that not many people make.
Yeah, just overlooked really. He just had a couple of Division II, I think, offers at the time, and Virginia Tech offered him. Was the first team to kind of lock in on him, and after that, Fork Union, he started to get a little bit of interest there. Teams kind of were checking in, but since Virginia Tech had showed that sort of interest and loyalty, and he kind of stuck it out. He was just kind of a diamond in the rough. They found him, and Virginia Tech coaches say when they saw him do drills, when they had him work out at a camp, they kind of knew. A lot of the credit goes to Holman Wiggins, who is now Alabama's wide receivers coach. He's the coach that actually discovered Christian and pushed Vance Weiss and Justin Fuente to take a look at him. And that's how they kind of landed him. And so, just was that talented, really, and just kind of got overlooked.
And then throughout the draft process, what have you seen? Because the word I always hear with him is growth, as a player and whatever. So at Virginia Tech, where was the biggest area of growth, or was he just pretty good from the beginning?
He was pretty good from the beginning. I think this year, from 2019 to 2020, he took a really big leap. Pro Football Focus was really all in on him this year. He was one of the highest rated linemen in the country. I think you saw his run blocking get a lot better. He was always, pretty clean in the pass protection, but just really all around this year. One thing I've heard from his camp and from Vance Weiss is that sometimes it didn't look like he was trying because it came easy to him. Everything was so easy, and so teams were just concerned. Wanted to push him a little bit, which they did at his pro day. But yeah, everything's kind of come easy for him. I mean, he's just a smart kid. Vance Weiss always says first in, the meeting room and things like that, and was always just dedicated and locked into football, and just really kind of continued to steadily improve his game.
And then as a run blocker too, because you saw some of that this year too, the finishing ability. Did that become a bigger thing for him this past year? Just finishing even with maybe more consistency, a stronger level. How do you think about that?
Yeah. I think that was kind of his focus, just to kind of, like I said, going into the season. I think he heard some criticism. Vance Weiss talked to offensive line coaches, kind of, in the NFL and scouts to kind of get feedback on what he needed to do, and that's what some of the things they wanted to see in that run blocking and show a little more intensity, and that's what he did. I think you saw a lot of stuff downfield with Khalil Herbert. A lot of those highlights you saw Christian Darrisaw opening the path for him. And it helped that they had a running back that could do that this year. So I think it was kind of a combination, and he certainly took advantage of that to show that that's part of his game, where he can get to that second level and really, knock people off their butt.
Yeah, and that you did. You're right. Those are the highlights that you saw, and it's like, I remember seeing some of those, and that it opened your eyes a little bit, because I know, coaches like that kind of stuff. As a pass protector, one of the things I've heard from some NFL teams or scouts or whatever is that, with Virginia Tech's offense is not a high-level passing attack, right? So, was he in position? It was not the traditional. It's not what you're going to see in the NFL as far as the style and all that. So as a pass protector, there were sometimes I think they had some issues, but overall, how would you rate him there? And what were some of the things that you felt like this is where he's probably going to have to improve here?
Well, just talking to people that have worked with him, he has the intangibles. He can bend. He has heavy hands. That's one of the things that all of his weight coaches talked about, or people worked with. His hands are just really heavy. So he has those kind of things that the makeup of a good pass protector. I know Virginia Tech didn't leave him on an island very much. So, he had protection, and he had a pretty good, group there up front too. So, I can understand that maybe they discount some of what he did in the passing game, but I don't think he's going to have any problem. They tested, they were looking at his flexibility on pro day, and he can move, I think too. He didn't get to run the 40 because he was recovering from that groin injury still a little bit. But I mean, he can move. So I don't think he's going to have problems adjusting to the NFL, the speed of the game in the pass protection. And one thing in the ACC, I mean, he played a series of very good pass rushers the last 3 years, and hadn't held his own. I think he didn't allow a sack this year, I think maybe 2 last year or something like that. So I know that Virginia Tech's passing game doesn't kind of translate well to the next level, but I mean, he played some really good players and never had a problem.
Very good. And what about him as a person? Because I'm sure you got to know him a lot better just because the series you're doing. What about him as a person? What do people here need to know about him?
Quiet kid, very quiet. fit in well at Fork Union. It's a military kind of school, and you get, you get punished and penalties for doing things wrong. Never had a problem. Just adapted well. His main interest is football. I know he loves Madden and playing video games, but doesn't have a lot right now outside that kind of takes his focus away from the game. He's really excited. I think this has been a dream of his, obviously, like a lot of kids, but he's worked towards this, and he's just very dedicated to making this, his profession and his career. So, and I think that's anybody you talk to will say, he's quiet and loves football. Vance Vice Scout asked him, like, what does he like to do? And Vance was like, I don't know. I've never seen him do anything other than football. It's like, hey, that's all I know him. That's what he does. So I'm sure he'll probably buy like a PS5 or new Xbox, but other than that, he's all in on football.
And it's funny because, coaches like to hear that. So
yeah,
they really like to hear that. I think they get concerned if a guy has too many interests sometimes. So last thing here, do you have a feel for either what, as far as like teams looking at him or area round? I think most of the time he's projecting that middle round type area, but did you get a feel for anything, how the draft process was going, just, in terms of what others were thinking or what they were hearing?
Yeah, I wrote about that for this latest part, where it's like 13 to 20 is where you kind of see all the projections. There's that big group of teams: Washington, Chicago, Las Vegas, Minnesota, that all have picks in that range and all have needs at tackle. I think the prevailing thought from his camp is that they're confident in the first round projection. They're not sure when the run on offensive tackle starts. So does it start later or does it start earlier? And one thing that his agent pointed out to me was that, with Carolina now kind of probably not going to take a quarterback, that they could take a tackle there. And that's another spot where maybe he moves up a little now, because if both tackles are gone, Panay, the kid from Oregon, and Northwestern, the tackle from there, those are the two kind of above Christian. But if they're gone early, and then Christian's the next one up. And so It depends where I think, that falls. And so, there's been a lot of movement already, before the draft. And so if that happens, more on draft day, does he move up? Or is the focus on another position where the offensive tackles move back a little? But I don't know if he gets past 20, just with the team, amount of teams right in that range that have that need.
Yeah, I don't think he does either. Mike, thank you for coming on. To let people know where they can follow you and read your stuff.
Yeah, at Michael Niziolek on Twitter, and Roanoke.com. We have the series that's been running, and we'll have another part. Obviously, I'm going to be with Christian on draft night, following his kind of reaction and seeing how things go. So we'll see if he ends up at Washington or somewhere else.
There you go. And if you're a big Virginia Tech fan, you can follow a lot more than Christian Darrisaw. So there you go. Mike, thanks a lot.
Thanks, John.
What's up? It's Mike Jones from the Football Jones podcast. I know you're enjoying your time with the John Keim Report, but once you're done, I want to invite you to come over and check out my podcast. Each week, we take a deep dive into some of the most pressing topics around the NFL. High-profile guests from the coach, player, and front office ranks, as well as the top league insiders. Check out the Football Jones podcast, another fine product brought to you by Empire Media.
That's it for this episode. Thanks to Michael and Logan for joining me, and thank you, as always, for listening. I'll be back Thursday with Washington safety Cam Curl. Talk to you next time.